Imagine stepping onto a plane at just 17 years old, confident, accomplished, yet quietly carrying the weight of history on your shoulders. Now imagine being humiliated midair, struck across the face by someone who should have protected you, not degraded you. What happens when the victim isn't just any teenager, but the CEO of a rising empire? What happens when the slap that was meant to silence instead ignites a global movement? This is the story of Selena Brooks, a young black CEO whose flight was supposed to take her across the Pacific, but instead catapulted her into the center of an international reckoning. A flight attendant's hand, a single act of violence, became the spark that exposed deep-rooted prejudice inside one of the world's most powerful airlines. But here's the question that lingers. How does a 17-year-old turn pain into power and humiliation into history? How far will one young woman go to protect not only her own dignity, but the dignity of millions watching around the world? Stay with us, because what unfolded on Flight 918 will leave you breathless. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a second of this journey. The Gulfstream G700 trembled in the thin night air, a sudden ripple of turbulence shuddering through its sleek body. Seatbelts rattled. Crystal glasses clinked sharply in their holders. A tray of steaming tea lurched upward before gravity yanked it down. In that chaotic instant, Margaret Collins, senior flight attendant, a woman who had served passengers for nearly 2 decades, reached out with a sharp, panicked motion. Her palm struck the cheek of the girl seated in 2A. Gas filled the cabin. The sound was unmistakable. A sharp crack that cut through the quiet luxury of Aurora Air's Flight 918. Selena Brooks froze. She was just 17 years old, yet she carried herself with the stillness of someone much older. Her dark curls framed a face more accustomed to questions than praise. For a second, she didn't move at all. The burn on her right hand, still raw from an accident in her company's lab, throbbed as hot tea spilled across her skin. Her father, Anthony Brooks, unbuckled halfway, his protective instincts flaring, but Selena raised a hand steady firm, stopping him. The cabin was silent except for the low roar of engines and the faint buzz of someone's phone camera, already recording. "Did she just slap her?" a passenger whispered from across the aisle. Margaret stood rooted in place, breathing hard, tray trembling in her grip. Her eyes flicked around, desperate for understanding. "I didn't mean," she stammered. But the words sounded thin, brittle, as though even she didn't fully believe them. Selena turned slowly toward her, cheek still flushed, eyes steady, not angry, not shocked, just steady. The silence stretched. Then came the ripple of voices. A middle-aged businessman, Edward Barnes, muttered low, unbelievable. His tone carried the weight of judgment, though no one knew yet what exactly they were judging. Another passenger, Isabella Cruz, raised her phone higher, angling to capture everything. The red light blinked. A live stream had begun. Margaret's throat worked. She wanted to explain that turbulence had jolted her, that her arm had moved without control. But as she looked at Selena, so young, so composed, so out of place in a leather seat meant for seasoned executives, the old doubts surged back. What was a teenager doing here? Dressed not in a business suit, but a hoodie, laptop half open on the tray, and the whisper of that thought slipped into her voice. "You shouldn't," she began, then stopped. Selena's eyes never wavered. "I shouldn't," what Margaret's mouth opened, then shut again. Jonathan Pierce, seated 2 rows back, leaned forward, seizing his moment. "This is precisely the problem," he said loudly enough for the cabin to hear. His tone dripped with certainty. "Children playing, executive. This is what happens when optics matter more than competence." Anthony Brooks straightened, but his daughter's hand stopped him once more. Selena's gaze slid briefly toward Jonathan, then back to Margaret. She still had not raised her voice. Not once. Outside the oval windows, night stretched endless and dark. Inside, the air grew thicker, heavier. Phones tilted higher, catching every word, every twitch. Selena finally spoke again. Her tone was low. Even, I think what just happened deserves clarity and truth, not excuses. Her words landed like stones on water, rippling through the silence. Margaret's pulse pounded in her ears. She had been trained for every emergency fires, medical crises, unruly passengers, but not this. Not the scrutiny of a girl whose face was already appearing on live streams across thousands of screens. Not the weight of guilt pressing in as she remembered the sound of her palm meeting soft skin. Her chest tightened. Was it really an accident, or had there been, hidden deep, a sliver of irritation at the girl's youth, her presence in this rarefied cabin, her unflinching confidence? Had that sliver guided her reflex? Even as the turbulence shook, Margaret swallowed hard, wishing for words, but none came. Selena pressed her burned hand gently with a napkin, her movements slow, deliberate. She did not cry out, did not accuse. The restraint unsettled Margaret more than outrage would have. Isabella Cruz's voice broke the silence, soft but cutting. The world is watching. Margaret flinched. Selena leaned back in her seat. Her father studied her, worry etched across his face. But he said nothing. He trusted her silence, the way she trusted her own calm. The cabin held its breath, and in that suspended moment, between turbulence and truth, between accident and accusation, the question burned in everyone's mind. Had Margaret Collins truly slapped the black teen CEO of a billion-dollar company? Or had the sky itself conspired to make it look that way either way? Nothing would be the same once they landed. 2 hours earlier, the private terminal in Houston buzzed with quiet efficiency. Chauffeurs parked black SUVs in neat rows. Porters wheeled leather suitcases across polished floors. Aurora Air's Gulfstream. G700 waited on the tarmac, silver wings catching the morning sun. Selena Brooks adjusted the strap of her backpack as she walked beside her father. Anthony Brooks was tall, composed, the kind of man who never rushed yet somehow always seemed ahead of time. He placed a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You ready for another marathon day?" he asked gently. Selena offered a small smile. She was used to questions that weighed more than they seemed. "Ready as I'll ever be." Her hand still bore a faint pink burn from a lab mishap 3 nights earlier. She had brushed it off as clumsy, but Anthony knew better. His daughter pushed herself beyond limits. A 17-year-old leading a billion-dollar recycling tech company came with no margin for rest. The boarding process was supposed to be discreet, but eyes followed her anyway. Selena's age made her stand out more than her hoodie or sneakers ever could. She tugged her backpack higher, headphones dangling, laptop tucked inside. Margaret Collins, stationed at the cabin door, noticed immediately. She had been in uniform since dawn, navy blazer pressed, hair pinned back, smile trained. Years of repetition had etched professionalism into her every gesture. But when her gaze landed on Selena, something stirred an old reflex of doubt. "Good morning," Margaret said, with a warmth that carried an edge. Her eyes flicked briefly to Anthony, then back to his daughter. "Is she traveling with you?" Selena met her eyes calmly. "Yes, I'm traveling. My name is Selena Brooks." Anthony's tone carried steel beneath courtesy. "My daughter is with me. She's also leading today's presentation in San Francisco." Margaret's eyebrows twitched upward, but she forced her smile to stay. Of course. Welcome aboard. Inside the cabin, polished wood gleamed. Leather seats curved in quiet luxury. Only a dozen passengers would make this flight, most of them executives or partners tied to Aurora Air's ongoing expansion. Selena found her seat, 2A, near the front. She slid into it without hesitation, though she felt Margaret's eyes linger from across the aisle. Jonathan Pierce leaned back, his expensive watch glinting as he scrolled his phone. He was already whispering to Edward Barnes, the businessman seated beside him. That's her, Jonathan muttered. The genius child CEO Edward shrugged. Looks like a teenager skipping prom. Jonathan smirked. Exactly my point. Selena pulled out her laptop, ignoring the murmurs. She tapped the screen awake, formulas and models lighting up. The screen displayed colorful simulations of polymers breaking down, then reforming into cleaner, stronger materials. It wasn't magic. It was chemistry, engineering, and persistence combined. Anthony watched his daughter settle into her rhythm. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly, trusting that she could handle whispers as she had handled boardrooms. Margaret moved down the aisle, offering drinks before takeoff. Her hands were steady, her smile polished, but her thoughts were restless. She had once taught chemistry in a small-town high school. She had lectured about molecules, bonds, reactions. And now, staring at the glowing formulas on Selena's screen, she felt a pang she couldn't name. She set a glass of water down on Selena's tray with more force than she intended. That looks complicated, she remarked. Selena looked up, unbothered. It's just modeling polymers. We're trying to recycle plastics without degrading them. Margaret forced a laugh, ambitious for someone so young. The words hung in the air. Selena tilted her head. Age doesn't change the equations. The molecules behave the same way now no matter who studies them. For a moment, Margaret was caught off guard. She wanted to retort, to insist that experience mattered more than raw brilliance. But the certainty in Selena's voice unsettled her. She turned quickly and moved to the next row. Isabella Cruz, seated a few rows back, had noticed. She opened a small notebook, scribbling. She wasn't just a passenger. She was a journalist, always chasing the nuance of human stories. Something about the young girl in 2A already caught her attention. The engines roared to life. The jet taxied smoothly onto the runway. Selena slipped her headphones over her ears, but kept the volume low. She preferred to hear the world, even while she escaped into music. Takeoff pressed everyone back into their seats. Clouds gave way to endless blue. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, Jonathan leaned forward again, his voice carrying, Anthony, with all respect, how long do you plan to let your daughter pretend she's running things? Anthony opened his eyes slowly. His tone was measured. There's no pretending. She runs the company. She built the model. She leads the team. Edward chuckled under his breath. She's still a kid. Selena turned, eyes calm, voice even. I've heard that before. Usually from people who stopped asking questions too soon. Jonathan frowned, caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to answer, let alone with such composure. The exchange lingered. Margaret poured tea near the galley, listening. She told herself she didn't care, yet each word tugged at the old part of her that once graded lab reports and corrected equations. Hours stretched. The cabin settled into a rhythm. Laptops glowed, papers shuffled, glasses clinked. Selena worked silently, adjusting simulations, running data through her program. Margaret approached again, tea tray balanced. The air outside had thickened with small currents of turbulence. Cups rattled softly. She paused near Selena's seat, watching the teen's concentration, the way her burned hand hovered slightly away from the keys. Margaret hesitated. Something like respect stirred in her chest, but it tangled with resentment, too. She had once believed she might change the world, and now here was a girl, barely old enough to vote, doing just that. As she set the cup down, the jet shuddered. The liquid leapt from its rim. Margaret's hand jerked, tray tilting. The moment that would soon circle the globe was seconds away. But in that instant, before the slap, before the burn, before the live stream began, the cabin was only filled with the ordinary sounds of flight engines, footsteps, the faint hum of air through vents. Selena looked up, sensing the turbulence more than seeing it. Her father shifted slightly, one eye open. Jonathan smirked again, still convinced he was right. Isabella closed her notebook, intuition humming. Margaret steadied her tray, unaware that history sometimes begins in the quietest seconds. The girl in 2A straightened her back, unaware that the sky above would soon turn her life into a headline. The cabin had settled into a rhythm that felt deceptively calm. The jet sliced through the sky, the engines humming in their steady, almost hypnotic cadence. Passengers shifted in their leather seats, opened laptops, exchanged small talk. The air smelled faintly of coffee and citrus polish. Selena Brooks sat upright in 2A, her laptop balanced on the tray table, lines of equations glowing softly on the screen. Her headphones hung loosely around her neck. She looked like any other teenager, except no one else in that cabin was responsible for running a billion-dollar company. Margaret Collins drifted down the aisle, heels clicking softly against the carpet. Every time her eyes fell on Selena, something tightened inside her chest. It was not just doubt. It was something heavier. Resentment, perhaps, or envy that she didn't want to name. She paused by Selena's seat. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked, voice even. Selena looked up briefly. "Just water, please." "Thank you." Margaret set a glass down, her smile too practiced to feel genuine. She should have moved on. Instead, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "First class isn't a place I usually see students. Are you traveling for school?" The question landed with a thud. Anthony Brooks, seated across the aisle, lowered the magazine he had been pretending to read. His eyes flicked to his daughter, then to the flight attendant. Selena stayed calm. "No, I'm traveling for work." Margaret tilted her head. "Work?" Her tone carried a note of disbelief that others in the cabin caught. "You mean an internship?" Selena's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "No, I'm the CEO of Brooks Innovations. We're based in Houston." The silence after that was heavier than expected. Edward Barnes raised his brows and gave a skeptical snort. Jonathan Pierce, unable to resist, leaned forward from his seat. "CEO," he repeated with mock admiration, "at 17. Impressive title. But let's be honest. Isn't it your father who's really pulling the strings?" Anthony stiffened, ready to respond. But once again, Selena lifted her hand gently, signaling she would handle it. She met Jonathan's gaze steadily. "I founded the company. My father supports me, but he doesn't run it." "I do," Jonathan chuckled. "Forgive me, but the markets don't usually bend to teenage ambition. This industry requires maturity, years of experience, not enthusiasm in a hoodie." A few passengers laughed under their breath. Selena felt the heat rise in her chest, but she breathed through it. Her therapist had taught her that stillness is sometimes the most powerful weapon. She let the silence stretch, let Jonathan's words hang like smoke. Then she said quietly, "Equations don't ask how old you are. Molecules don't wait for birthdays. If the science works, it works." Even Edward stopped smirking. Isabella Cruz, notebook open on her lap, jotted something quickly. Jonathan sat back with a thin smile. "We'll see how long this experiment lasts." Margaret moved down the aisle, unsettled. She had seen difficult passengers before. She had managed screaming executives, crying children, entitled elites. But this felt different. The calm way Selena had spoken unsettled her, as though the girl were unshaken by disdain that might crush anyone else. Anthony leaned toward his daughter. His voice was low, only for her. "You don't have to carry their doubt. You know." Selena closed her laptop for a moment. "If I don't." Who will? Her tone was soft, but her eyes carried fire. Anthony reached for her burned hand, brushing it gently. "You carry too much already." Selena pulled her hand back slowly. "It's the only way to prove them wrong." That exchange lingered with Isabella, who scribbled faster. She could feel the story forming, though she wasn't sure yet what shape it would take. Hours into the flight, the tension kept resurfacing. Jonathan whispered again to Edward about liability and optics. Margaret poured drinks with her polished smile, though her thoughts spun around Selena's equations. She remembered chalkboards from years ago. Students who had looked at her with the same intensity Selena now carried. She had abandoned that life for reasons she no longer liked to revisit. Watching this girl succeed where she had failed pressed on old wounds. She found herself muttering under her breath while preparing trays in the galley. Too young, too bold, too sure. The turbulence began lightly, a shiver through the fuselage. Margaret braced one hand against the counter. She balanced cups on the tray, her jaw tight. She thought again of the way Selena had answered her. So calm, so precise. A 17-year-old speaking as though she had nothing to prove, when in fact every breath she took in that cabin was a battle to be seen as legitimate. Margaret envied it, but she also feared it, because if Selena was real, if her brilliance was undeniable, then what did that mean for Margaret's own life, her own choices? The jet steadied, but Margaret's chest did not. Back in 2A. Selena reopened her laptop. She tapped quickly, adjusting simulations, feeding new data into the model. On the screen, colorful graphs shifted, polymers stretched and reformed. She whispered to herself as she worked, lines of equations becoming rhythm in her mind. Jonathan glanced over with a smirk. Play-acting scientist, now Selena didn't look up. "You can dismiss me if you like. The science will dismiss you back." That answer drew a small laugh from Isabella, who was still taking notes. Edward shook his head, but his smirk had softened into something closer to curiosity. Anthony Brooks leaned back, watching his daughter navigate these currents with a calm he himself struggled to maintain. Pride swelled in him, but so did fear. He knew how sharp words could cut. He also knew how quickly perception could ruin even the most brilliant truth. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising at 39,000 feet. Expect some light chop as we cross over the Rockies." Margaret glanced toward Selena's seat again. The girl hadn't flinched. She simply continued typing, equations unfolding like music. And that was when the thought slipped into Margaret's mind, one she hadn't admitted before. This girl could succeed in ways Margaret never had. And that thought frightened her. She carried the tray down the aisle once more. Steps firm, expression neutral. But inside, the first sparks of doubt about herself and the resentment towards Selena were already burning hotter than the engines outside. What Margaret didn't know was how quickly those sparks would ignite into something the entire world would soon witness. The hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing. The cabin had found a fragile balance after the earlier tension, but the undercurrent of skepticism lingered like static in the air. Selena Brooks ignored it. She had grown used to whispers and sidelong glances. They were part of her life now. As ordinary as boarding passes and gate announcements, she shifted in her seat, propped her laptop open, and slid her fingers carefully across the keys. The faint sting from the burn on her hand made each keystroke feel sharper, but she welcomed the reminder. Pain, in her world, was proof of work. The screen glowed with cascading formulas. Polymer chains broke apart, simulated by swirling graphics, then reassembled into tighter, cleaner sequences. A process most people would find dry or incomprehensible were for Selena as alive as music. She leaned forward, adjusting variables, her lips moving silently as if reciting lines of poetry. Across the aisle, Edward Barnes leaned sideways, watching. He was a businessman, not a scientist, and the numbers looked like hieroglyphs to him. Still, there was something magnetic about the way the teenager worked, so intent, so grounded. Jonathan Pierce, however, scoffed audibly. Equations on a plane, he muttered. It's almost cute. Selena's father, Anthony, turned his gaze on Jonathan. His expression was calm, but edged with steel. Do you always mistake discipline for play? Jonathan shrugged. I call things as I see them. She's bright, I'll admit that, but leading a billion-dollar company from a first-class seat. This is a photo op, not leadership. Selena closed her laptop halfway and looked directly at him. Do you think leadership is shouting in boardrooms, signing papers with expensive pens? Leadership is about solving problems. That's what I do, whether in a lab, at a desk, or here at 39,000 feet. Her voice was steady, measured, not defensive, not pleading. It startled Jonathan more than he wanted to admit. From a few rows back, Isabella Cruz lifted her phone slightly, pretending to scroll while the camera recorded. She caught not just Selena's words, but her composure, the way her eyes didn't flinch. Later, she knew. People would argue about the science, about the contracts, about the politics, but what they wouldn't be able to argue with was the girl's presence. Margaret Collins approached with the tea service, her tray balanced. She forced a smile as she reached Selena's seat. Her eyes, however, betrayed curiosity. That looked advanced, she said, nodding toward the screen. Selena tilted it back open. It's a model for plastic recycling. We're trying to reduce degradation so material can be reused multiple times. Margaret raised her brows. And that's something you understand. The words hung like a challenge. Selena's lips curved in a small, patient smile. Think about sugar dissolving in hot tea. That's a bond breaking. Now imagine being able to reverse that, pulling the sugar back out, pure and whole. That's what we're trying to do with polymers, reuse without waste. For the first time, Edward leaned forward, intrigued. That actually makes sense. Margaret's face flushed. She hadn't expected the explanation to be so clear, so vivid. She had once used similar metaphors in her own classroom years ago. The memory of chalk dust, eager eyes, and her own younger self stung unexpectedly. Jonathan rolled his eyes. Cute analogy, but metaphors don't move markets. Selena didn't look at him. She was still watching Margaret, almost as if she knew that the real battle wasn't with the loud skeptic, but with the quiet one carrying doubt behind her smile. Anthony reached across the aisle, his voice gentle. "Drink some water. Selena, don't overwork that hand." Selena obeyed, if only to give him peace of mind. She flexed her fingers, feeling the sting recede slightly. Inside, though, her thoughts swirled. She hated moments like this, being forced to prove herself over and over. Every explanation she gave, every calm answer, felt like armor patched hastily against relentless arrows. She glanced at her father. His face carried pride, but beneath it was worry. She knew he wanted to shield her, but he couldn't. Not from whispers, not from doubt. Those were battles she had to fight alone. Margaret moved on, but the exchange left her unsettled. She poured tea for another passenger with automatic precision, yet her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the girl's calm explanation, about how she herself had once loved breaking down science into simple images. And she wondered, uncomfortably, if she had underestimated someone she should have admired. Isabella scribbled in her notebook again. She noted the metaphor, the dynamic, the way a teenager had gently outshone adults twice or three times her age. She could already imagine the headline if this trip turned into something larger. The aircraft rocked slightly as it crossed into rougher air. Glasses rattled. A few passengers gripped their armrests. Selena steadied her laptop, waiting for the turbulence to ease. She whispered to herself, not realizing her microphone was still on. Break apart. Reform. Nothing is wasted. Not even doubt. Anthony heard and smiled faintly. He recognized her mantra, the one she had adopted ever since the company's earliest struggles. Jonathan shook his head, though the words gnawed at him more than he let show. Margaret heard them too, and for reasons she couldn't explain. They stayed with her like an echo she couldn't escape. The cabin grew quieter again as the turbulence passed. Selena typed steadily, feeding data into her model. Around her, conversations hushed, as if the passengers themselves sensed they were watching something unusual. A teenager in a hoodie, burned hand resting on the keys, building equations that might change the world. Margaret collected empty cups, her smile fixed, but her steps slower. She glanced at Selena one more time, and something sharp twisted inside her. Pride and shame, envy and recognition. She wasn't sure which feeling would win, but she knew one thing: the girl in 2A was not going to fade quietly into the background, and that truth frightened her more than the turbulence outside. The Gulf Stream sliced through the afternoon sky, leaving behind the sprawl of clouds like rippling cotton fields. The light in the cabin had shifted, softer now, a golden hue seeping through the oval windows. Passengers adjusted their seats, some dozing, some working, others simply staring out at the endless blue. Selena Brooks kept her laptop open. The hum of the engines was a steady soundtrack to the rhythm of her thoughts. She had adjusted variables in her model 3 times now, chasing a subtle stability she could feel but not yet see. Her burned hand throbbed lightly, but she ignored it, pressing forward with the precision of someone who refused to surrender even the smallest detail. Her father Anthony glanced at her with quiet pride. He had learned not to interrupt when she was in that state. It was like watching a pianist mid-performance. Any break would be sacrilege. In the galley, Margaret Collins balanced a tray lined with porcelain cups. Steam curled upward, delicate and fragrant. She had brewed the tea carefully, measuring spoonfuls the way she once measured chemicals in a lab. She liked tea service. It gave her something exact, something she could control, But today her hands weren't as steady as she wanted them to be. She tried to focus on the task, but the memory of Selena's calm explanation replayed in her mind. Sugar dissolving, bonds breaking, polymers reforming. Simple, elegant, undeniable. It was the kind of metaphor she used to love. And it reminded her too much of the teacher she had been, and the teacher she had failed to remain. Her jaw tightened as she lifted the tray. She told herself the unease in her chest was just fatigue, just another long flight, not envy, not guilt. She moved down the aisle with practiced grace, but her thoughts betrayed her rhythm. Selena looked up as Margaret approached. She slid her laptop slightly to the side, giving space for the tray. Her face was calm, polite, no sign of judgment, no sign of the storm Margaret was fighting inside. "Tea?" Margaret asked, her voice thinner than usual. "Yes, please," Selena replied softly. The tray tilted as Margaret leaned forward. At that same moment, the jet shuddered violently. A pocket of turbulence had found them without warning. The fuselage rattled, glasses clinked like chimes, and passengers gasped. The tray lurched upward, cups slid, hot liquid surged forward. Margaret's body reacted before her mind did. She reached out sharply to steady the spill. Her arm shot across the tray, palm flat, sudden, uncontrolled. The sound rang out clear. A crack. Skin against skin. Selena's head snapped slightly to the side. For a breathless instant, the cabin froze. Her cheek bore the mark of Margaret's palm. At the same time, the tea splashed across her hand, scalding the tender skin already weakened by the earlier burn. She inhaled sharply, the sting searing up her arm. Anthony shot up from his seat, fury flashing in his eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" Selena lifted her unburned hand immediately, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad, sit down." Her composure silenced him more effectively than any shout could. Anthony stood frozen for a moment, fists clenched, before lowering himself back slowly. The other passengers erupted in murmurs. Edward Barnes muttered under his breath. "She hit her." Isabella Cruz, phone already in her hand, tilted it upward. The red light blinked to life. A live stream began. Silent, but merciless. Margaret's breath came in short bursts. She still held the tray, but her arms trembled. She opened her mouth. "I didn't. It was turbulence. I didn't mean." The words tumbled out. Fragile, desperate, unconvincing. Selena pressed a napkin to her hand, wincing as the burn throbbed. She did not cry. She did not shout. Her face was composed, though her eyes carried a weight far heavier than 17 years should bear. Jonathan Pierce leaned forward, seizing the chaos. "This is exactly what I've been saying. Children in these roles invite disaster. This is a circus." Isabella turned her camera slightly, catching him in frame. His smug expression was now part of the story, archived forever. Anthony glared across the aisle. "You will not speak about my daughter like that." Selena raised her voice just enough to cut through the noise. "Everyone, please, be quiet." The cabin fell still again. Even the engines seemed to fade beneath her command. She looked at Margaret directly. "You hit me?" Margaret's knees weakened. She shook her head. "No, yes, it was an accident." The turbulence, Selena's gaze did not waver. The turbulence spilled the tea. "Your hand struck my face." The clarity of her words sliced through the confusion. Passengers exchanged glances. Isabella's live stream comments began scrolling faster, invisible to those in the cabin, but racing across thousands of screens. Margaret's throat tightened. She wanted to protest again, to beg them to believe it had not been intentional. But even she wasn't sure anymore. Had her hand moved only from reflex, or had something darker guided it a fraction of a second where frustration and envy took form? Selena dabbed her hand with the napkin again, her breath steady. She looked at her father, then back at Margaret. "You should apologize." The demand was soft, not shouted, but it carried the weight of authority. Margaret's lips trembled. I'm sorry," she whispered. Selena nodded once. She didn't press further. She returned her gaze to the napkin, wrapping it carefully around her burned skin. But the cabin wasn't satisfied. Edward shook his head. "That won't be enough. Not after what we just saw." Jonathan sneered. "You people act as if this is a scandal. It was turbulence. Nothing more." Isabella lowered her phone slightly, her voice sharp. "The world's already watching. Jonathan, and they'll decide what it was." The silence that followed was suffocating. The jet hummed, oblivious to the storm it carried inside. Margaret stood frozen, tray in hand, a woman split between shame and denial. Anthony stared at her with controlled fury, his trust in the airline shattering with every second. Selena sat in her seat, shoulders squared, eyes steady, a teenager who had just been struck yet refused to crumble. The burn on her hand pulsed with pain, but inside her chest, something stronger had ignited. Not anger, not vengeance, something quieter, steadier. Resolve. The slap was not just an accident of turbulence, it was a line crossed. And the consequences of that single moment were already stretching far beyond the walls of the cabin. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It had become a courtroom, a stage, and a battlefield all at once. The hum of the engines could not drown out the silence that followed the slap. It was not silence of peace, but of unease, of dozens of passengers recalibrating what they had just seen and where they stood. Selena Brooks sat still, her cheek faintly flushed, her hand carefully wrapped in a napkin that was already stained with tea. She did not cry. She did not break. She sat upright, composed, though her breath carried the subtle weight of restraint. She had chosen calm, but calm was not the same as surrender. Her father, Anthony Brooks, leaned forward in his seat, his jaw clenched so tightly that the cords in his neck stood out. He wanted nothing more than a demand that Margaret Collins be removed instantly, to shout at the airline's crew until they obeyed. But his daughter's command still echoed in his mind. "Sit down." Those two words, spoken with steady control, reminded him that this moment was not his to own. It was hers. Margaret remained frozen a few feet away, tray trembling in her hands. She had apologized, but the apology had hung in the air like a threadbare sheet, too thin to cover what had happened. She felt every eye on her, every judgment heavy on her skin. Her chest rose and fell too fast. She could not decide if she should retreat to the galley, attempt another apology, or try to explain again. None of the choices seemed safe. The passengers began to fracture. Edward Barnes, ever the opportunist, leaned forward and muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "This is assault. A paying passenger was struck. If this airline doesn't act, then it's complicit." Jonathan Pierce rolled his eyes and spoke with disdain. "Oh, please. It was turbulence. We all felt it. Are we truly going to ruin a woman's career over an accident?" Isabella Cruz, her phone still in hand, turned to him. "Jonathan, the world is already watching, and they don't see turbulence. They see a grown adult striking a teenager." Jonathan bristled, his face reddening. a teenager who shouldn't even be here. She's not a CEO. She's a child playing at being important. This is why the board needs to intervene before the company collapses. Selena's gaze lifted toward him. Her voice, though quiet, carried a steel edge. You do not get to decide where I belong. The words lingered, heavy and undeniable. Jonathan opened his mouth to retort, then closed it again, realizing that every camera now turned in his direction. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some murmured support for Selena. Others exchanged skeptical whispers. The divide was no longer subtle. It was growing, pulling the cabin into opposing camps. One woman seated near the back stood. Her voice shook, but she spoke with conviction. I saw it. I saw the tray shake, but her hand moved faster than the turbulence. She struck that girl. Don't you dare call it an accident. A man across the aisle countered sharply. She didn't mean to. We've all had moments where reflexes betray us. Don't turn this into something it isn't. The argument spread like wildfire. Passengers raised their voices, leaning into the aisles, some defending Margaret, others demanding accountability. The cabin crew tried to hush them, but their efforts were drowned out by the rising chorus of division. Margaret's breathing grew shallow. She wanted to scream that it had been an accident, that she wasn't a monster, that she had dedicated decades to service. But the memory replayed in her mind, and she couldn't silence the flicker of doubt. Had there been a flash of frustration in her movement? Had envy guided her hand in that single instant? She could not be certain, and that uncertainty gnawed at her, more painful than the accusations. Selena remained calm, but inside her chest, questions wrestled with her composure. She felt the sting on her cheek, the burn on her hand, the stares of the passengers. She asked herself whether this moment was about her alone or about something larger. She asked herself if speaking out now would make her seem petty, or if staying quiet would allow injustice to be minimized once again. Anthony leaned closer to her. Do you want me to call the captain? She shook her head slowly. Not yet. Her restraint baffled him, but he trusted her. He had to. She was not a child playing at leadership. She was a leader, already navigating a storm that would have broken many adults. The captain's voice broke through the tension over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a brief pocket of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. His tone was calm, detached, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Passengers scoffed. Some shouted toward the ceiling. Are you going to address the assault? But the intercom clicked off, leaving only the hum of engines and the fractured voices of the divided cabin. Isabella turned her phone toward Selena again. Do you want to say something? Selena hesitated. Her hand tightened around the napkin. She thought of her responsibility not just to herself, but to every young person who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had ever been struck, silenced, or dismissed. Her chest rose with a deep breath. Then she spoke. What happened here is more than turbulence. What happened here is a choice made in a moment of anger, or envy, or bias, and choices have consequences. Her words carried like a bell, ringing clear above the noise. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to argue, to deny, but deep down she knew Selena's words were true. The choice had been hers. The consequence was now unfolding before her. Jonathan scoffed audibly. This is theater, nothing more. But even his voice trembled slightly, betraying his fear that the tide of public opinion was slipping away from him. Anthony placed a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder. He whispered, Just for her. Whatever comes next. You don't face it alone. Selena nodded. But inside, she knew that much of this battle was hers alone to carry. She had been struck. She had spoken. Now the world would decide whether it would listen. The passengers remained divided, their arguments swelling and subsiding like waves. Some defended Margaret as a loyal employee unfairly punished for a mistake. Others demanded her immediate removal. The flight had become more than a journey across the sky. It had become a mirror, reflecting the fractures of a society struggling with dignity, accountability, and truth. Margaret retreated to the galley at last, setting down the tray with trembling hands. She pressed her palms to the counter, her shoulders shaking. She told herself again and again that she hadn't meant it, but each repetition felt less convincing. Selena exhaled slowly, feeling the sting in her hand intensify. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering strength. She knew this was only the beginning. The turbulence had passed, but the storm inside the cabin had only just begun. The Gulf Stream cruised high above the Pacific, but inside its cabin the air was thicker than sea-level fog. Every seat, every eye, every whisper carried tension. The slap had been a spark, but the silence that followed had turned into something far more combustible. Selena Brooks remained in her seat, posture upright, the napkin wrapped around her burned hand growing darker with each minute. Her cheek was still faintly red, but her calm expression held. It was a calm that unsettled even her father, Anthony, who could see the storm she was containing within. Anthony leaned closer. "Selena, we should call the captain in here. We can't just let this slide." Selena turned her head slightly, her eyes steady. "If we call him now, it will look like we're asking for protection. I don't need protection. I need accountability." The word struck Anthony in the chest. He wanted to argue, but he recognized the conviction in her voice. She was not playing at strength. She was living it. At the back of the cabin, Margaret Collins stood in the galley, her hands gripping the counter until her knuckles whitened. The tray she had set down rattled faintly as the aircraft hummed beneath her feet. She could still feel the contact of her hand against Selena's cheek, could still hear the gas that had followed. She whispered to herself, "It was an accident. It was turbulence. I didn't mean it." But each repetition grew weaker, as if the truth itself was resisting her denial. A passenger from row 4, a middle-aged woman named Denise, finally spoke up. "We all saw it. Don't try to rewrite what just happened." Jonathan Pierce shifted in his seat, his voice sharp, laced with irritation. "This is ridiculous. You people are overreacting to turbulence." A slap. It was nothing more than a slip of the hand. Isabella Cruz, camera still recording, turned toward him. "Jonathan, the comments on this stream disagree with you. Thousands of people are watching, and they're not calling it turbulence. They're calling it assault." The word echoed through the cabin, assault. It carried weight, legal and moral. Heads turned, whispers grew louder, and the division between passengers deepened further. Edward Barnes adjusted his tie, his voice deliberately calm. If the airline wants to survive this, it needs to act decisively. Pretending nothing happened will only make it worse. Jonathan's face flushed. This girl is not even an adult. She should not be in this position in the first place. She's a child, pretending to run a company. We're all fools for indulging this charade. Selena lifted her head, her eyes locking with his. Her voice was soft, but carried through the cabin with clarity. "I didn't choose to be struck, and I didn't choose your disbelief. but I will choose how I respond. That's what leadership is. The words silenced him for a moment. He looked away, suddenly aware that every camera in the cabin had turned to catch his reaction. Margaret's heart pounded harder. She could feel her career, her reputation, her very identity as a professional crumbling with each passing second. The passengers no longer looked at her as a flight attendant, but as a symbol of failure, perhaps even malice. She could not breathe beneath the weight of their judgment. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris. We ask for your continued cooperation and calm. We are maintaining smooth altitude. Cabin crew, please continue regular service." A laugh erupted from a passenger near the middle. "Regular service? You just had one of your crew slap a teenager? Do you call that regular?" Others murmured in agreement, their frustration boiling over. The captain had attempted to diffuse, but his avoidance only inflamed the tension. Selena glanced at Isabella, whose phone continued to stream. "How many are watching?" Isabella glanced at the screen, her voice hushed but urgent. "Over 25,000 right now. It's climbing by the minute." Selena absorbed the number without outward reaction. But inside, her pulse quickened. 25,000 strangers were now witnesses, participants in this drama unfolding miles above the ocean. 25,000 who would demand resolution, who would not forget. Anthony leaned close again. "Selena, we can end this by calling headquarters. One call, and they'll handle everything." Selena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Steady. "Not yet. This isn't just about handling it. It's about showing them how it should be handled. If I let them clean it up quietly, the world will think it was swept under the rug." Her father exhaled, torn between fear and admiration. He could see her reasoning, even if it meant prolonging the fire she was standing in. Margaret emerged from the galley at last. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She stood near the aisle, her voice breaking. I need everyone to know that I didn't mean to. It was turbulence. I lost my balance. I never meant to hurt her." The words tumbled out desperately, but the passengers were unmoved. Denise stood again. "Your hand didn't just slip. It struck her face. We all saw it." Another passenger added, "You can't apologize your way out of this. There are consequences." Margaret's knees weakened. Her voice cracked. "I've served for 25 years. I'm not that person. Please believe me." Selena looked at her, her expression calm but firm. "It's not about what you believe you are. It's about what you did, and what you did cannot be undone with words alone." Margaret covered her face with her hands, sobs breaking through despite her efforts to contain them. The sight did not erase the truth of her action, nor did it soften the anger of the passengers. If anything, it made the divide sharper. Some pitied her, others condemned her. Jonathan seized on her collapse. "Look at her. She's broken. Is that not punishment enough? Must we destroy her for one mistake?" Isabella's voice cut through sharply. "If Selena had cried, if she had broken in front of us, would you call that punishment enough, or would you still be doubting her?" The silence that followed was telling. Selena turned toward the window briefly, her reflection faint against the darkening sky. She felt the ache in her hand, the heat still lingering on her cheek. But deeper than the physical pain was the question gnawing inside. How far should she take this? How much of herself was she willing to sacrifice to make this moment matter? Her inner voice whispered possibilities. If she demanded Margaret's removal mid-flight, The headlines would be immediate, but would it be justice or spectacle if she stayed silent? The narrative could be twisted, minimized, lost in the chaos of denial. She wrestled with the responsibility of choice, the power she carried even as a teenager, and the cost of wielding it. The arguments among passengers swelled again. Some demanded justice. Others pleaded for mercy. The cabin crew hovered nervously, unsure whether to step in or step back. And above them all, the live stream carried on, broadcasting every word, every expression, every fracture of this airborne tribunal to tens of thousands who were already taking sides. Selena exhaled slowly. She had not chosen this storm, but she would not let it pass without meaning. The hum of the engines pressed against the silence inside the Gulf Stream, a constant reminder that no one could leave, that every choice made inside this cabin was sealed in altitude until they landed. The air itself seemed to carry judgment, thick with eyes and whispers. Selena Brooks adjusted the napkin around her hand again. The burn still stung, but the sting was less than the weight of indecision pressing down on her. She had carried herself with poise until now, but inside she wrestled with the same questions over and over. If she demanded action, would they call her vindictive? If she let it go, would her silence be used to erase the truth? Her father leaned forward once more. His voice lowered. "Selena, you have nothing to prove. You've been wronged. Let me handle this. I'll call headquarters right now and have this flight crew replaced." Selena shook her head gently. "If you do that, it becomes your fight. It can't be yours. It has to be mine." Anthony hesitated. He wanted to argue, to insist, to protect. But there was something unshakable in her tone, a quiet strength that reminded him she was not just his daughter anymore. She was a leader with her own burden to carry. Across the aisle, Jonathan Pierce leaned back, his smirk returning now that the chaos had stretched long enough for him to regain composure. "You're all making a spectacle out of Turbulence. The captain has spoken. It's time to let it go." Selena turned her head slowly toward him. "Do you believe silence heals wounds?" Jonathan blinked, caught off guard. "I believe restraint prevents hysteria." Her lips curved slightly, not in a smile, but in the acknowledgement of his narrowness. Restraint is not silence. Restraint is choosing when to act, and how. Silence is letting injustice live unchecked. The words sank into the space like anchors, heavy and undeniable. Several passengers murmured agreement. Isabella Cruz, her live stream still running, whispered to Selena. "It's at 42,000 viewers now. People are sharing it across platforms. They're demanding the airline respond." Selena exhaled through her nose. "Steady. Then we'll give them a response." She rose slowly from her seat. The motion alone silenced the murmurs. A 17-year-old, standing before seasoned executives, career crew, and skeptical strangers, yet commanding their attention as if she had been born for this very trial. She walked toward the galley where Margaret Collins stood, pale and trembling. Margaret's eyes darted upward, searching for mercy, for forgiveness, for some reprieve. Selena's voice was clear, not loud, but it carried. "Margaret, I will ask you one question, and I want you to answer honestly. Did you strike me?" Margaret's lips parted. Her throat tightened. She wanted to cling to the excuse of turbulence, to insist again that it had been an accident. But the eyes on her were too many, the silence too heavy. The truth pressed against her like a weight she could no longer deny. Her voice cracked. "Yes, I struck you." Gas rippled through the cabin. Some passengers nodded grimly. Others shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan muttered under his breath, but even he could not mask the impact of her admission. Selena nodded once, slowly. Then we are done pretending. She turned toward the aisle and spoke not just to Margaret, but to the entire cabin. This is no longer a question of turbulence. This is no longer about excuses. This is about dignity. And dignity will not be dismissed at 39,000 feet. Anthony rose behind her, his pride and fear colliding in his chest. Isabella lifted her phone higher, ensuring every word reached the tens of thousands watching. Edward Barnes sat forward, recognizing the gravity of what was unfolding. Selena continued, her voice growing firmer. The captain has chosen silence. Headquarters may be waiting to bury this when we land. But I will not wait. I am calling Aurora Air directly, and I will ask them one question. Do they stand with dignity, or do they stand with silence? She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady as she scrolled through contacts. The room felt suspended in time, every breath waiting for the connection. The signal crackled, then steadied. A voice answered, "This is Aurora Air Corporate Operations." Who is calling? Selena's reply was calm, precise. This is Selena Brooks, passenger on Flight 918 Seat 2A. I am also the acting CEO of Brooks Innovations, your largest cloud services contractor. I am calling because one of your senior crew just struck me mid-flight, and your captain has refused to address it. The silence that followed was almost audible. Then the voice stumbled. Miss Brooks, we will connect you immediately with senior operations. Within seconds, another line clicked in. A woman's voice, professional but tense. This is Dana Mitchell, Vice President of Operations. Miss Brooks, I am told there's been an incident. Selena's voice held steady. Yes, one of your senior flight attendants admitted to striking me. The captain has downplayed it as turbulence. We are at altitude with no accountability from your staff. You have 42,000 people watching live. What do you intend to do? The cabin fell utterly silent. Even Jonathan leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the exchange. Dana cleared her throat, struggling for composure. Miss Brooks, I assure you, Aurora Air takes these matters very seriously. We will investigate fully when you land. Selena's eyes narrowed slightly. When I land, this will already be a global scandal. You don't have until we land. You have until this call ends. Dana faltered. I need to consult with legal before making a statement. Selena's voice sharpened. You don't need legal to decide whether striking a passenger is wrong. You need courage. Which is it? The tension in the cabin thickened. The passengers leaned forward, enthralled. Isabella's phone buzzed with comments racing faster than she could read. Anthony's eyes glistened with pride. Margaret sank against the galley wall, tears running down her cheeks. Dana's voice, quieter now, almost pleading. Miss Brooks, please, we will do the right thing, but we need time. Selena's reply was swift. Time is the luxury of those who are not burning. I don't have that luxury. Neither does anyone watching. I will ask again, does Aurora Air stand with dignity or with silence? The line went quiet. Everyone waited. Seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, Dana exhaled. Aurora Air will stand with dignity, effective immediately. The crew member in question is suspended pending termination review. The captain will be instructed to document the incident and comply fully. We will issue a statement within the hour. Selena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Thank you. I will hold you to that. She ended the call. The cabin erupted. Some passengers clapped quietly. Others whispered furiously. Jonathan buried his face in his hands. Isabella lifted her phone higher, whispering to her audience, "You heard it here first. Aurora Air has suspended a crew member mid-flight, live, in front of 42,000 witnesses." Selena sat back in her seat, her breath steady but her heart pounding. She had not planned for this exact path, but she knew it was necessary. She had forced the choice. Her father leaned close, whispering with pride, "You did what I never could have done at your age." Selena looked at him, her voice soft. "I didn't want this fight, but if it came to me, I couldn't walk away." And though her hands still burned, though her cheeks still carried the echo of the strike, her resolve had never felt stronger. At 40,000 feet, a teenager had forced an airline to act. The cabin no longer felt divided. It felt like history being written in real time. Aurora Air Flight 918 soared above the ocean night, but inside the Gulf Stream the atmosphere was electric, charged with more energy than any lightning storm. The call had ended, yet the echoes of Selena Brooks' words still reverberated through the cabin. She had forced Aurora's leadership to act in real time. A suspended crew member, a promise of a public statement, and 40,000 strangers who had heard it all with their own ears. Selena sat back in her seat, finally resting her burned hand on the armrest. Her chest rose and fell with measured breaths. She had stood. She had spoken. She had drawn a line in the sky. Yet beneath her calm expression, her thoughts spun like the turbines outside the window. What had she unleashed? Would Aurora Air keep its word? Or had she simply bought a fragile truce? Her father, Anthony, leaned closer. His voice carried both pride and caution. "Selena, you've done what no one else on this flight could. But you need to be ready. Corporate doesn't take humiliation lightly. They'll try to twist the story when we land." Selena nodded. "That's why we don't let it wait until we land. We keep it alive now." Isabella Cruz raised her phone slightly, her face glowing with the reflection of the screen. "Selena, your stream just crossed 100,000 viewers. People are tagging the airline nonstop. News outlets are clipping this in real time. It's already trending worldwide." The passengers murmured, some amazed, others nervous. Edward Barnes rubbed his chin thoughtfully. 100,000 eyes on one flight. Aurora Air won't be able to bury this even if they tried. But that makes it dangerous. The higher the visibility, the greater the backlash if they stumble. Jonathan Pierce, red-faced and restless, slammed his palm against the armrest. "This is madness. A child turning a private inconvenience into a global scandal. Do you realize the damage you're doing? The shareholders will revolt. Contracts will collapse. Entire divisions will shutter." Selena turned to him slowly, her voice calm yet cutting. "You speak of shareholders. I speak of dignity. If contracts collapse because of the truth, then they were built on lies." Jonathan scoffed. "You're naive. Business doesn't run on dignity. It runs on power." Selena held his gaze. "Dignity is power. You just don't recognize it yet." Her words landed with the weight of a verdict. Some passengers clapped softly. Others shifted, uncomfortable, realizing the ground beneath them was changing. At the back of the cabin, Margaret Collins sat slumped on a jump seat, her hands covering her face. Every sound felt magnified, every judgment louder than the engines. She had confessed. She had apologized. But her 25 years of service felt like ashes slipping through her fingers. Her chest ached with the realization that she might never wear the uniform again. The captain's voice came once more over the intercom, tighter now, tinged with strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris. We are aware of ongoing discussions in the cabin. I ask everyone to remain calm and allow the crew to continue service as best as possible." Laughter broke out from a passenger in row 3. "Service. Your crew is suspended mid-flight. Who's running this plane? Captain, corporate, or the passengers?" The intercom clicked off abruptly. The avoidance strategy was collapsing. Isabella's phone buzzed. She read quickly, then looked up with widened eyes. CNN just picked up the stream. Aurora's stock dropped 6% in the last 30 minutes. The cabin reacted with gasps and murmurs. Anthony's jaw tightened. Edward whispered, "That's billions erased mid-flight." Selena closed her eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in recognition of the magnitude. She had not simply defended herself. She had triggered a corporate earthquake. Her phone buzzed. A new call. The screen showed Dana Mitchell's name again. Selena answered. Dana's voice was more urgent now, a hint of desperation beneath the professionalism. "Miss Brooks, I need you to understand the scale of what's happening. Media outlets are swarming us. Our board is demanding answers. If you continue streaming, we risk irreparable damage." Selena's reply was steady. "The damage isn't from the stream. It's from what happened in this cabin. The stream is just the mirror." Dana hesitated. "We are preparing a public statement as we promised, but we need you to help de-escalate. Please ask your witness to pause the live stream." Selena glanced at Isabella, then back at the phone. "No, the live stream is the only reason you're acting at all. Without it, this would already be buried." Dana's tone hardened. "You're forcing us into a corner. Miss Brooks." Selena's eyes narrowed. "No, Dana. You put yourself in the corner when you chose silence. I'm just holding up the light so everyone can see it." The line went silent. Then Dana sighed. "The CEO himself will call you in 5 minutes. Please be prepared." The call ended. Selena set the phone down and leaned back. Anthony stared at her, torn between admiration and fear. "Do you know what it means when a CEO calls you mid-flight? This isn't just about one airline anymore. It's about the entire industry watching." Selena nodded. "Good. Then maybe it won't just be about me anymore either." Jonathan sneered. "You're playing with fire. When this ends, you'll be remembered as the girl who burned down a company." Selena looked at him, her voice unwavering. If a company burns because it cannot face dignity, then maybe it needed to burn. The passengers erupted in divided reactions. Some applauded. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The cabin was no longer just divided. It was alive with conviction, fear, admiration, and outrage. At the back, Margaret whispered to herself, "What have I done?" She pressed her hands against her eyes, the weight of her action crushing her. Selena's phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID read Richard Albright, CEO of Aurora Air. The cabin froze. Every conversation halted. Every breath hung in the air. Isabella lifted her phone higher, ensuring the world would witness. Selena answered, "Miss Brooks." Richard's voice was deep, firm, measured, but beneath the polish was tension. "This is Richard Albright. I want to speak with you directly." Selena's tone was respectful but unyielding. "Then speak. We are listening." He hesitated, aware that his words were being broadcast to an audience larger than most shareholder calls. "First, I want to apologize for what happened on Flight 918. It is unacceptable for any passenger to be treated that way, let alone struck by a crew member. I take full responsibility for the failure of our captain and crew." Gas and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Anthony's eyes widened. Even Jonathan leaned forward, stunned. A CEO's direct apology mid-flight was unprecedented. Richard continued, "Effective immediately. Margaret Collins is terminated. The captain will be relieved of duty upon landing. Aurora Air will issue a formal apology tonight and commit to reviewing all training and disciplinary procedures. We will not tolerate behavior that undermines the dignity of our passengers." Margaret collapsed into quiet sobs, her hands trembling. She had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud shattered what little composure she had left. Selena absorbed the words, then asked calmly, "And what about the silence that followed? What about the captain who minimized this as turbulence, the managers who wanted to bury it, the culture that allowed it to happen?" Richard's pause stretched long. "You're right. It is more than one incident. It is a culture we must confront. And we will." Selena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, then prove it. Publicly. Not in statements written by lawyers. In actions the world can see. Richard's voice softened, carrying a note of respect. "You have my word. You will see action within 24 hours. The line clicked off. The cabin was silent for a beat, then erupted with reactions. Applause, gasps, shouts. The passengers knew they had just witnessed something historic. Isabella whispered into her phone. "You all just heard it live. A CEO terminated staff mid-flight and promised cultural reform. All because a teenager demanded dignity." Selena leaned back, her hand trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Her father placed his hand over hers. "You've changed everything." "Selena!" She looked out the window into the endless night. "No, we've only just begun." The cabin of Aurora Air Flight 918 was no longer just a pressurized vessel cutting through the night sky. It had become a stage, a newsroom, a tribunal, and a battlefield for truth. The passengers sat in stunned silence after the CEO's call. The weight of what they had just witnessed was sinking in a mid-flight termination, a public apology, and a promise of reform. But outside the walls of the aircraft, the story was already galloping across the globe. Isabella Cruz kept her phone raised, her eyes wide as she watched the stream's numbers climb. 500,000, she whispered, then louder. 500,000 people are watching live. Guests scattered through the cabin. Even Anthony Brooks sat back, momentarily overwhelmed. He had seen corporate scandals in his career, but never one unfolding in real time at 40,000 feet, carried by the voice of his 17-year-old daughter. Selena Brooks remained calm, though her pulse raced. She had spoken truth, and she had won an admission from the highest authority in the airline. But now she faced something larger, something heavier. 500,000 people looking at her as more than a victim, more than a passenger. They were beginning to see her as a voice. And voices came with responsibility. Jonathan Pierce broke the silence with a snarl. "Congratulations! You've turned a moment of turbulence into a media circus. You think this makes you powerful? All you've done is invite chaos." Selena's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "Chaos existed before I spoke. I didn't invite it. I exposed it." Her words cut through the air, drawing murmurs of agreement from several passengers. Edward Barnes nodded thoughtfully, his skepticism softened by the undeniable reality unfolding before him. "She's right. The chaos isn't new. It's just visible now. At the back." Margaret Collins sat collapsed in the jump seat, her face buried in her hands. Every word spoken, every number announced on the stream, pressed against her chest like a crushing weight. She had dedicated decades to service, and in a single moment, she had become a symbol of disgrace. Her tears fell quietly, unseen by many, but to her they were louder than the engines. Selena's phone buzzed with notifications, flooding in faster than she could read them. Messages of support, outrage, disbelief, solidarity. Celebrities had begun sharing the live stream, advocacy groups tagging it with demands for systemic reform. Isabella's voice trembled with excitement. "Selena, you're trending #1 globally. Hashtags everywhere. Flight 8. Dignity at Fortico. Selena Brooks, you're the story now." Selena exhaled slowly. The reality of it pressed in. "I don't want to be the story. I want dignity to be the story." Anthony placed his hand on hers. "Sometimes the story needs a face. Selena. And tonight, that face is yours." Her eyes glistened, but she held her composure. She was not naive. She understood what her father meant. The world rarely rallied around an idea without a person to embody it. She had become that person, whether she wanted it or not. Jonathan shook his head, muttering bitterly. "This will pass. The news cycle always moves on. Tomorrow, they'll forget." But Isabella turned her phone toward him, her voice sharp. "No, Jonathan, the internet doesn't forget, and neither will history." The live stream comments scrolled faster than Isabella could track. Viewers were demanding immediate reforms, boycotts, accountability. Others were sharing their own stories of being silenced, dismissed, or humiliated in planes, in schools, in workplaces. The stream had become more than a record of one incident. It had become a gathering place for voices long unheard. Selena felt the weight of it. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to close her eyes. She listened to the voices around her, to the hum of the engines, to the rush of her own heartbeat. She thought of all the young people who had ever been told they were too young, too black, too female, too different to belong in spaces of power. She thought of the burn on her hand, the sting on her cheek, the humiliation she had felt when struck, and she thought of the moment she had chosen not to break, but to speak. Her inner voice whispered, steady and resolute, "This is bigger than me." The cabin buzzed again as another notification hit Isabella's feed. She read it aloud. Breaking news. Aurora Air shares suspended from trading after a 9% drop. Lawmakers are calling for an emergency review of airline protocols. Gas echoed. Edward muttered. 9%. That's billions. Whole fortune shifting because of one slap. Anthony looked at his daughter, awe etched into his features. "Selena, you just moved markets with your voice." Selena met his gaze. "Not with my voice, with the truth." At that moment, a new call came through to Selena's phone. The caller ID displayed a name that made even Anthony inhale sharply. "Secretary Hall," Selena whispered. "The youth, Secretary of Transportation." The passengers around her froze, their eyes widening. The live stream audience surged past 600,000, Isabella whispered. "You have to answer. The whole world will hear." Selena pressed, "Accept, Miss Brooks." Secretary Hall's voice was crisp, authoritative, and surprisingly warm. "I've been briefed on the incident aboard Flight 918. First, I want to commend your composure. Second, I want to assure you that this will not end with words from a CEO. The Department of Transportation will be reviewing this case as a matter of civil rights and aviation safety." The passengers gasped again. Jonathan's face drained of color. Even Edward leaned back, stunned. Selena's voice remained calm. "Thank you, Madam Secretary. Dignity should not depend on altitude. It should not vanish at 39,000 feet. If you are serious, prove it with change. The secretary replied without hesitation, "We will. Expect a formal inquiry to begin within 48 hours. And Miss Brooks, you've reminded us all what leadership looks like." The line ended, but the echoes remained. The cabin erupted in applause this time, unrestrained and genuine. Even those who had doubted earlier felt the magnitude. A passenger whispered, "She's 17." 17. And she just forced a federal review mid-flight. Selena sank back into her seat, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew this was no longer just about her. The burn on her hand was personal, the sting on her cheek intimate. But the movement swelling beyond the fuselage was collective, unstoppable. Isabella lowered her phone slightly, her eyes glistening. "Selena, do you realize what you've done? You've turned this cabin into a catalyst. This is history." Selena looked out the window, where the horizon glowed faintly against the night. History isn't written in boardrooms. It's written where people refuse to be silent. And as the plane carried them closer to San Francisco, closer to the media storm awaiting them on the ground, Selena Brooks sat tall in her seat, knowing she had crossed a threshold. She had spoken for herself. Now, she was speaking for many. The seatbelt sign glowed, a steady orange reminder that the journey was almost over. Yet for everyone inside, Aurora Air Flight 918, the real journey was only beginning. The soft voice of Captain Harris crackled over the intercom, almost trembling with the weight of what had unfolded. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into San Francisco International Airport. Estimated arrival in 25 minutes. Please remain seated with your belts fastened." His words carried none of the usual practiced confidence. Instead, they sounded like the closing lines of a man who knew his career hung in the balance. Selena Brooks sat still, her body upright but her mind spinning. The burn on her hand throbbed dully beneath the cool compress another passenger had offered. The sting of Margaret Collins's slap lingered on her cheek. But even more present was the heavy awareness of what awaited her when the wheels touched down. She glanced sideways at her father, Anthony Brooks. He gave her a reassuring nod, though his own eyes betrayed the mix of pride and worry twisting inside him. "You've already done more tonight than most do in a lifetime," he said softly. "But you need to be ready. Cameras, reporters, officials. It will be chaos." Selena swallowed, her throat dry. "I didn't ask for any of this, Dad. I just wanted to get to Tokyo. I wanted to prove myself in meetings, not in front of the whole world." Anthony placed his hand gently over hers. History doesn't ask for permission. It chooses moments. And sometimes it chooses people who least expect it. You didn't want this, but you didn't run from it either. Around them, the passengers whispered among themselves, glancing at Selena with a mix of awe and curiosity. Isabella Cruz kept her phone streaming, narrating updates to the hundreds of thousands still watching. "We are 20 minutes from landing," she said softly. "Careful not to intrude. Selena Brooks has become the center of a global story tonight. The energy in this cabin is unlike anything I've ever seen." Jonathan Pierce sat rigidly across the aisle, his jaw clenched. Every few seconds, he checked his phone, scanning headlines. His face grew paler with each notification. He muttered under his breath, "Board will never forgive this. Markets, regulators, lawsuits, all because of her." Edward Barnes, the businessman who had once doubted Selena, leaned forward. "Maybe the board won't forgive her, but the public will. People forgive truth faster than they forgive silence." Selena overheard them, her chest tightening. She turned toward the window. Outside, the dark Pacific stretched endlessly, dotted with faint lights from fishing boats. She pressed her palm against the glass, her reflection staring back, tired, young, and suddenly burdened with more than she had ever thought possible. Her inner voice whispered again, "I didn't choose this, but maybe I was chosen." The plane jolted slightly as turbulence rattled the cabin. Gas escaped from a few nervous passengers. Selena's body tensed, her knuckles white against the armrest. For a moment, she wasn't a CEO or a symbol. She was just a 17-year-old afraid of falling. Anthony noticed and squeezed her hand. "Breathe, Selena. It's just air reminding us we're still alive." The words steadied her, though she realized she was trembling not from fear of the turbulence, but from the uncertainty of what lay ahead on the ground. She imagined the swarm of cameras, the shouts of reporters, the flashing lights. She imagined Margaret being escorted away, Jonathan scrambling for excuses, and herself standing before microphones she hadn't asked for. Could she carry the weight of expectation? Margaret Collins sat slumped near the galley, her uniform wrinkled, her spirit broken. She stared blankly at the floor, her lips moving in silent confession to no one in particular. "I don't know why I did it. I don't know what came over me. A junior flight attendant, too nervous to speak, simply avoided her gaze." The crew, once a team, had splintered under the pressure of one act and its fallout. Isabella narrated again. "Viewers, we can confirm now news outlets are waiting at SFO. Federal officials are coordinating. What started as a single live stream is now the top story in the world." Her voice faltered, her professionalism cracking under the magnitude. "Selena Brooks is about to step off this plane into history." Selena turned to her father, whispering, "What if I fail? What if I walk off that plane and they see me as a child, pretending to be something I'm not?" Anthony's voice was firm. "Then remind them you're not pretending. You are who you are, strong, calm, and true. That's what shook the world tonight." The descent grew steeper, the engines humming louder. Lights of the Bay Area glittered through the window bridges like silver threads, highways glowing like veins of fire. San Francisco, waiting. Selena's stomach tightened. She could almost feel the ground rising to meet her. Jonathan hissed under his breath. "This will destroy the company, the stock, the investors, the credibility gone. She thinks she's a hero, but she's a wrecking ball." Edward shot him a sharp look. "No, Jonathan. She's not a wrecking ball. She's a mirror. And what you're afraid of isn't her power. It's what she's reflecting back at you." Jonathan looked away, his face stiff with denial, but the words had hit their mark. The cabin fell into an uneasy hush as the wheels lowered with a metallic thud. Selena's heart pounded in rhythm with the clatter. She closed her eyes again, whispering silently to herself, "Stay calm. Stay human. Lead with dignity." The plane touched down with a roar of tires against runway. Passengers jolted forward, then settled as the aircraft slowed. The silence that followed was heavier than the landing itself. Everyone knew the ground was only the beginning. From the windows, flashing red and blue lights became visible. Police vehicles, press vans, airport officials. A sea of cameras pointed at the taxiing jet, waiting like predators for the moment the cabin door opened. Captain Harris's voice returned, broken and weary. "Welcome to San Francisco. On behalf of Aurora Air, we apologize for the events that occurred tonight. Please remain seated until instructed." The plane rolled to a stop at a remote gate. far from the usual terminals. Authorities wanted control of the scene. Selena unbuckled slowly, her body moving as if through water. She felt dozens of eyes on her passengers, crew, strangers who had become witnesses to history. Isabella whispered, "They're waiting for you. Selena, you're not just a passenger anymore." Selena stood, her knees shaky but her back straight. She felt Anthony's hand steady her shoulder. She took one last breath of the recycled cabin air, knowing the next breath would be filled with flashing lights and shouted questions. As the door clicked open and the jet bridge connected, the air shifted, cold, heavy, electric, the kind of air that carries revolutions. Selena Brooks walked forward, not as a teenager escaping humiliation, but as a young leader stepping into fire. The cabin door opened with a metallic sigh, and a wall of sound rushed inside. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the hum of voices fused into a single roar of anticipation. The passengers craned their necks, their eyes following Selena Brooks as she rose from her seat. Anthony Brooks stayed close, his hand resting lightly on her back, guiding but not shielding. "You don't need me to speak for you," he whispered, "but I'll be here, every step, so you never feel alone." Selena nodded, her throat tight. Her palms were slick with sweat, but her spine was straight. The sting of the slap was still there, faint but constant, a reminder of what had sparked this fire. She stepped into the jet bridge, and the noise grew louder, sharper. Outside, floodlights turned the night into a stage. Dozens of microphones and cameras pointed at her. Airport police stood in formation, not to block her, but to hold back the tide of media. Officials from Aurora Air hovered nervously in the background, their faces pale, their ties askew. Margaret Collins was escorted quietly down another stairwell, her head bowed. Jonathan Pierce followed, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice frantic, but no one paid him attention anymore. All eyes were on Selena. She paused at the end of the jet bridge, the cold air biting her skin. For a fleeting second, fear threatened to crack her composure. She was just 17, just a girl who had wanted to get on a plane. The thought whispered, "You're too young, too unprepared, too small for this moment." But another voice rose stronger inside her, the same one that had steadied her in the cabin. "Dignity doesn't wait for age. Justice doesn't ask for permission. Speak." She stepped to the microphone cluster. The crowd surged with shouts. "Selena, how do you respond to what happened on Flight 918? Do you think Aurora Air is guilty of systemic racism? Are you filing charges against the flight attendant? Do you realize you've become a global symbol tonight?" The questions fired like bullets. Selena raised her hand, and to everyone's surprise, the crowd quieted. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear enough to cut through the chaos. "Tonight, I was humiliated at 39,000 feet. I was slapped by someone who saw my skin before they saw my humanity. I was told, without words, that I did not belong in the seat I paid for, the seat I earned, the seat I rightfully held. But what happened to me is not just about me, it is about everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Everyone who has ever been treated as less than human. Everyone who has ever had to swallow pain to keep peace." Gas rippled through the crowd. The reporters leaned closer, pens flying across notepads, cameras zooming in. Selena continued, her eyes shining, but her voice unwavering. "I will not be silent. I will not let this story fade into another forgotten headline. Because this isn't about turbulence in the sky. It's about turbulence in our society. Dignity should not depend on your skin color. It should not vanish when you walk into a boardroom, a classroom, a courtroom, or onto an airplane. A murmur of agreement spread through the onlookers. Isabella Cruz, still live-streaming, wiped her eyes as she whispered into her phone. "She's rewriting the script for all of us." Selena's gaze swept the crowd, meeting eyes where she could. "I don't want vengeance. I want accountability. Aurora Air must change. Airlines everywhere must change. And not just airlines. Every institution that profits from our labor, our trust, our presence, they must be held to the same standard. Because the seat I defended tonight isn't just mine. It belongs to every child who dares to dream, every traveler who dares to believe they deserve respect, every person who refuses to shrink in the face of prejudice." The applause began quietly, from Edward Barnes, who had stepped off the plane behind her. Soon it spread to other passengers, to onlookers, until it rolled across the press line like thunder. Anthony's chest swelled with pride. He had seen his daughter's strength before, but never like this, never against the full weight of the world. A reporter called out, "Selena, what happens now?" Selena inhaled deeply. She had thought about this during the descent, shaping it in her heart. "What happens now is bigger than one company. I am launching a foundation called Sky of Dignity. Its purpose will be simple: to protect the dignity of travelers, to create real accountability for airlines, and to provide resources for those silenced by discrimination. I invite Aurora Air and every airline in this country to meet me at the table, not with apologies, but with commitments, with resources, with reforms that cannot be reversed." The crowd erupted again. Reporters shouted follow-ups, but the energy was no longer chaos. It was momentum. Anthony whispered into her ear, "You just built something in real time. They'll follow you." Selena looked out into the sea of lights, and for the first time, she felt the fear recede. The weight was still there, but it was no longer crushing. It was purpose. Behind her, Aurora Air executives exchanged panicked looks. Richard Albright, the CEO who had spoken to her mid-flight, stepped forward, sweat glistening on his brow. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the volume of the crowd's chants. "Dignity, dignity, dignity." The police formed a path through the reporters, guiding Selena and Anthony toward a waiting car. As she walked, microphone still trailing, she heard Margaret's quiet sobs echoing from the side stairwell. For a moment, Selena paused. She turned her head, just enough to see the woman who had struck her. Their eyes met Margaret's, swollen with regret, Selena's steady but not cruel. Selena said nothing, but the silence carried its own verdict. In the car, the door shut, muffling the roar outside. Selena leaned back, exhausted. Anthony reached for her hand. "I don't think you realize what you've just done." Selena closed her eyes. "I didn't set out to do anything. I just refused to disappear." The car pulled away from the floodlights, but the movement had already ignited. Across phones and televisions, in living rooms and airports, in classrooms and boardrooms, people replayed her words. They shared them, dissected them, and drew courage from them. On Flight 918, dignity had been denied. On the ground, dignity had been reclaimed. And in the echo of her voice, dignity had become a demand the world could no longer ignore. What began as one young woman's humiliation at 39,000 feet became a global call for dignity. Selena Brooks showed us that strength does not always roar. It can speak with calm, with truth, and with unwavering resolve. The slap that was meant to diminish her instead became the moment that lifted countless voices long ignored. But this story is not just about one flight, one airline, or even one girl. It's about us, all of us, who deserve to be seen, respected, and treated with humanity no matter where we sit, no matter the color of our skin. It is a reminder that silence protects no one, but courage can change everything. As we close this chapter, let's not only remember the pain, but also the love and resilience it inspired. Let's honor dignity wherever it is threatened, and hold accountable those who believe prejudice can fly unchecked. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you reflect, talk about it. And if you believe in dignity for all, join us for the next story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the fight for respect is far from over. And together, we'll keep the skies honest.